Good evening, fam. Mr. Mark 60 at your service. Welcome and thanks for joining me. As I told you earlier in my introduction, I would be bringing you various articles, historically as well as contemporary. This one from 1919. Interesting because we were just recently discussing the 1921 Oklahoma City mob violence that overtook Black Wall Street. However, they didn't, or maybe I missed, uh, the mainstream media failed to talk about 1919. And this involved federal and state efforts to disarm African Americans. Let's look at this story and find out why. On July 31st, 1919, Major Walter H. Loving of the Army's Military Intelligence Division went to 135th Street and Lenox Avenue in Harlem to watch people buy newspapers at the corner's four newsstands. Washington's riot had ended 10 days earlier, while Chicago's still raged. And Loving wanted to know how closely New Yorkers were following the events. What he saw greatly impressed him. Eager readers snapped up new editions as soon as they arrived. Thousands of copies selling within 10 minutes. People, white and black, actually scrambled to get these papers, he marveled. And the bigger and more sensational the headlines, the quicker the paper sold. Loving worried that New York was on the brink of its own race riot. Never before had the Negroes of Harlem been so worked up over anything as they were at present over the recent race riot in Washington and the present one in Chicago, he randomly or remarked ominously. Loving was not exaggerating. New York's racial tensions late on the night of July 19th, an argument between two men, one black, the other white, almost led to a riot in Harlem. According to the New York Times, when the white man disputed something the black man said, the latter drew a handgun and fired 5 shots, the latter being the black man, wounding 2 bystanders. By the time a police captain and 15 officers arrived, several thousand excited Negroes had filled 127th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues. When the police dispersed the crowd and began searching houses for persons believed to have been concerned in the riot, someone opened fire on them. On July 22nd, a black man stabbed a white man who had slapped a black woman in a subway car. That same day, a white soldier ordered a black man to give up his seat aboard an elevated train. When he refused, the soldier tried to pull him to his feet, and only the conductor's intervention prevented a fight from breaking out. Another white soldier stood outside a Harlem theater, spewing racist invective until the police made him stop. The least little cause is likely to start a riot, Loving warned. As the major recognized, the least little cause had roots in now flourishing New York Negro movement. So, soapbox orators on street corners constantly reminded their hearers that they went to fight for democracy abroad, and they now may be called upon to fight for that same democracy at home. Well, folks, first of all, we don't have a democracy, but let's keep going. The black press's exaltation of the New York Negro fighting for his rights, coupled with national outrage at the continuing depredations of white mobs, here we go. This was a precursor to 1921. Look at this. Had encouraged forceful, swift resistance against even the slightest offenses of white supremacy. This is why this conversation about racism and white supremacy continues to this day. This is 1919. Come on now. Here we are in 2022 2021, and we're still talking about this. How soon then until the next riot, and where would it be, he wondered. This question preoccupied officers in the MID and officials in the Bureau of Investigation, Department of Justice, as well as the Post Office. During and after the war, the MID and the BI carried out a massive program of surveillance of African Americans. Now, they surveilling us, okay? And the suppression of black publications such as The Messenger. Fixating on links between communists, socialists, and advocates of racial equality. That's what we get called when we're standing up for ourselves. We're called communists, advocates of racial equality, and socialists. So what are they? The post-war cascade of racial violence convinced national security officials that a national uprising of blacks, inspired and led by socialists and communists, boy, these Peckerwoods are a trip, was now underway. Consider some of the report titles: Bolshevik activities, possible espionage act and propaganda among Negroes. I mean, this is what was in the papers at the time. Look at this. I mean, it's crazy. It says the fact that relatively few agitators, quote unquote, had connections to communist and socialist organizations did not dislodge this crap that you saw in the papers. Indeed, the absence of evidence merely convinced officials, especially young J. Edgar Hoover, who on August 1st, 1919 was named head of the Department of Justice Radical Division, that they were not looking hard enough. So, driven by Hoover, agents redoubled their efforts to uncover red roots for what they dubbed radical activities. That's the same label that African Americans in their fight for justice get called today. Radical. Racism, white supremacy plays a lot of games with a lot of words. The federal campaign to link the Red Scare to 1919's racial conflict is thoroughly documented. However, less well known is a sustained drive undertaken in 1919 to disarm African Americans because of fears that they were plotting violent uprisings. Wonder why we don't have guns for our protection to this day. With the cooperation of state and local officials, as well as white gun dealers, federal and military officials, local as well, and white gun dealers, federal and military officials seized weapons from individual black gun owners. Look at this. So now they're going to take the weapons so we can't defend ourselves. Look at this. Federal and military officials. So this is the government helping these white mobs, just like you're going to see them do in 1921, monitored weapons sales to blacks and asked gun dealers not to sell weapons and ammunition to African Americans. In many cases, gun dealers needed no prompting. On their own initiative, they turned away black customers. This attempted disarming of African Americans represented a national where am I? Where am I? I hate this. Hold on. Represented a national expansion of the practice already carried out by riot troops and police during outbreaks of anti-black collective violence. Look at them. The seizure of weapons from black self-defenders who were then often charged with carrying concealed weapons. So, we get charged with carrying concealed weapons. Whites get charged with being pseudo-police. Isn't that a trip? Given the extent of black armed resistance during 1919, it is not surprising that African Americans found ways to evade efforts to strip them of their weapons. That's right. Determined to secure all of their constitutional rights, they resisted infringement of their right to bear arms. This was no abstraction. African Americans needed these weapons to defend themselves because, for the most part, local police and federal riot troops had failed to protect them against white mobs. Man, come on, man. You really, really think that we can go to this government and ask for any kind of redress when their history has been to suppress, to deny, to make weak our entire community, to deprive us of the ability to defend ourselves? You really, really think that this administration or any other administration would listen to any of our petitions for protection, let alone civil and equal rights? This is a pipe dream, brothers and sisters. Let me continue. Then it shows a cartoon that was published in the weekly Washington Bee. This is a black weekly, and it shows a mob policeman, and the caption says, "Wait until I disarm him." And then the police says, "In the name of the law, surrender your gun." The black guy says, "It's my only protection." This is so crazy. It was crazy then, and it's crazy now. If you really think that we have moved as a country, as a nation, much further than what you're looking at right there, you are sadly mistaken, because all of this has simply gone underground. It is more subtle, more insidious than ever before. As a matter of fact, what you are seeing, in my view, happening within the popular media is an attempt to give the impression that white America has moved beyond this kind of mob violence. Yet, if any of you are paying close attention, there is a contingent of whites in this nation who have this deep-seated fear of this country becoming brown, black, non-white predominantly. And there is a backlash that has been going on since Obama. It was probably going on before Obama, but since Obama and beyond, it's become more obvious. This country and the people in it, many of them, have not moved beyond the fear of, as Frances Cress Welsing has already stated, the fear of genetic annihilation. And I'm going to do a video on her book, The ISIS Papers, and explain, as she puts it, this deep-seated subconscious fear of the black gene that could wipe out all white skin. Let me just keep it very, very plain, and I'll get to that soon. It says the cartoon aptly captures the dilemma of African Americans during the year of racial violence. Law enforcement officers failed to stop white mob violence, yet they demanded that blacks surrender weapons they needed to defend themselves. This from the Washington Bee, August 2nd, 1919. Courtesy of the Washingtonian Division, D.C. Public Library. This is sick, man. This is sick. This is why I have to continue talking about this, because not much has changed. It's just more subtle. The drawing depicts a policeman standing between a hulking white man wielding a pistol and a club, and a much smaller black man bearing a pistol. And it says, as I read before, "Wait until I disarm him," the policeman confides to the white mob figure, as he orders the black figure to surrender his weapon. The black figure says, "It is my only protection." I, brothers and sisters, I don't like talking about this over and over and over. I'm getting tired of talking about racism, white supremacy, and the detrimental effects that it's having, not only on black people, but the world. This is a worldwide structural system. It is not We're not merely talking about systemic racism. It's beyond that. It's bigger than that. I don't want you to get confused. White fears of black uprisings. It says the telegram arrived at the MID's office in Washington on the morning of July 31st. According to the commanding officer of Camp Johnson, race riots would be on in Jacksonville, Florida, August 1st, or so military police at the camp believed, based on statements from local blacks. The officer reported that he was taking all possible precautions, quote unquote, and had apprised local officials. With Chicago still embroiled in its bloody riot, was Jacksonville next? No. The reports of an uprising proved nothing more than vague rumors that some black residents planned to shoot up the town, which never happened. In the summer of 1919, Jacksonville was just one of several cities where nervous white citizens and officials, civilian and military, reported planned uprisings by African Americans. I mean, they were scared to death. To this day, the white population fears us deciding to collectively get them back for the years of social, political, and psychological violence on our community. They really worry about us somehow or another taking revenge. It's not talked about, but it's there. It says, none of the plots were authentic, but they unsettled whites in the affected communities and set off alarms in the post office, the Department of Justice, Bureau of Investigation, and MID. It says, not since Nat Turner's revolt in 1831 and John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry Arsenal in 1859 had fears of black uprisings so transfixed and troubled white Americans. Should the Negro become fairly well organized, that's what they're worried about, and that's been our dilemma. We are not organized to do anything. It says, should the Negro become fairly well organized and demand social equality, there is no doubt but that serious trouble would ensue throughout the entire southern belt of the United States. This is why we have been kept divided. The old divide and conquer game has been played very well within the system of racism and white supremacy, and they have divided and conquered our communities one by one. You look at us. And many of us right now are so comfortable, we don't even want to have this conversation. We don't want to think about how bad things really are in this nation. Individually, yes, you have many successes. I don't deny that. I'm successful in my own view. But that doesn't change the structural devastation and devastating effects of structural racism, white supremacy. I'm sorry. We cannot ignore this. Everyone in the black community is not doing well. It's different for everybody. We're all not experiencing America the same way. So we cannot simply not talk about it, though some would advocate that that's exactly what we would do. I'm sorry. I'm not going to. So it says, there is no doubt but that serious trouble would ensue throughout the entire southern belt of the United States. A white attorney from South Carolina warned the BI on July 3, 1919. Major J.E. Cutler, a MID officer who had closely monitored the Washington and Chicago riots, believed more bloodshed was very probable. And what made him think that? Was it just paranoia? In mid-August, social events organized in Philadelphia for black servicemen attracted the attention of the BI. In Newport News, a Labor Day speech by Matt Lewis, the black editor of the Newport News Star, enraged several white listeners who claimed that Lewis said, "We colored people must hang together to protect ourselves against the whites." If a white man abuses you, knock him down. A local BI agent dutifully began abstracting the content of the News Star. The News Star. Any little thing we say. An incipient yet warped awareness of the new Negro movement reveals itself in these fears. Anxiety over purported uprisings stemmed in part from an understanding that the riots in Washington, Chicago, and elsewhere were not aberrations, but few whites grasped the mass resistance to anti-black collective violence linked to these episodes. We were fighting back. We think we're fighting back today, but it's not the same thing. Why? Because most of the movements that you see today in the popular mass media, white supremacy racism has already hijacked. They are guiding it, steering it, financing it, and controlling it. These are not movements from the ground up. Black Lives Matter isn't. The truth is coming out about that now. That's not a movement that has anything to do with black people. So it says, instead, whites interpreted acts of resistance and rumors of uprising as evidence that blacks themselves were responsible for the national outbreak of racial violence and were plotting more attacks on whites. Now, why would we plot attacks on whites if we were not provoked? Why would whites think that? Because they live in a whole different mental universe. It's called denial. Denial of their own behavior. And I'm just reflecting on the past because it's so relevant today. It says federal officials also grossly misunderstood the sources of black resistance. They believed a communist revolution was being mounted in the United States. Robert Bowen, a postal official, succinctly expressed this viewpoint in an essay entitled Radicalism and Sedition Among the Negroes. As reflected in their publications, distributed less than 3 weeks before Washington's riot, he accused the New York Age, the Crisis, and especially the Messenger of arousing class consciousness among African Americans in order to establish communist rule. What the hell is wrong with these people? What? I don't even know why I'm asking the question. It's rhetorical. I already know what's wrong with them. If they're not in charge and in power, then something's got to be going wrong. Something is out of place. Something is it's got to be communism. Black people can't really want to have their own agency. No way. So, in Bowen's telling, the Negro masses may be made to assume a very dangerous power. Through these publications. A dangerous power through the publications. The publications would cause us to assume a very dangerous power. What kind of power are you talking about that you think we want? We simply want to be left alone and respected. Bowen keenly appreciated that African Americans took their military service during the war as evidence of equality, damn right, and had returned fighting for their rights. We should not have had to go through that. The hell is wrong with these Peckerwoods? As far back as the first movement of the American troops to France, the Negro publicists began to avail themselves of the argument that since the Negro was fit to wear the uniform, he was therefore fit for everything else. Damn right. Look at this. And although he excerpted statement after statement in which new Negro authors and publications hail militancy in pursuit of democracy, he fixated on Chandler Owen and A. Philip Randolph's promotion of socialism and their support for the IWW. That must have been a socialist organization. That's Philip Randolph. That's him. That's not every black person. There probably were some blacks who preferred socialism compared to what they were running into here in America or facing here in America. But that wasn't everyone. A simplistic and inaccurate syllogism dominated the essay. Absolutely. All new Negroes advocate equality. Communists seek classless equality through revolution. Therefore, all new Negroes are revolutionary communists. This is what this guy concluded. However, the new Negroes were already outnumbered and outgunned, aren't we always? Especially if they're taking our guns. To judge by the rumors of black uprisings that inundated Washington in July and August, and the federal response to the rumors, new Negroes were now also misunderstood, maligned, and feared. This is what happens when the white population seeks to deny the black population simple humanity and respect. The one who seeks to oppress lives in the greatest fear. They brought this on themselves, and they continue to do that to this day. But it's different today because now we are being made to believe that we have white allies. You have whites running around virtue signaling. I'm not racist. Right? Apologizing. You got Marion Williams running around with a book that purports to have white people understand their own racism. Listen, you don't need Marian Anderson or Marion Williams, whatever her name is, to have white people or to make white people aware of their racism. They are fully aware of their racism. They are fully aware of their privilege, and they are fully aware that they like the positions they hold in this society. You're not going to make me believe that white people don't understand racism, white supremacy. Get out of here with that nonsense. But this is what the mass media, right? This is what the conversation of the day is. I say don't be confused. Even Biden is weighing in on this nonsense. And he's got everybody believing that they care. The government cares about black history and what was done to us in 1921. Here we are in 2021, and now you want to talk about you care. What's changed? Okay? Our position in the economy, in the country, in the culture is the same, with a few individuals all over the place having modicums of success. But we own and control no institutions. We cannot protect ourselves, even if we wanted to. We own and control no major corporations, businesses, banks. You understand? That's what has not changed. You are still being denied through systemic machinations the ability to own and control major resources that would give your community, my community, agency. True agency. Oh, you have individual agency, to be sure. You do not have group agency in terms of being able to take care of yourself and being able to self-determine where your group and how far your group will move and progress and thrive in this structure called racism, white supremacy. Because we do not own and control certain institutions, own and control certain major resources of any real value, our ability is limited in terms of how, where we move within this structure. And so, what we must do in light of that dilemma is get on code. What does that mean? That means that you think differently about how you respond to what you now know to be the delirious or deleterious effects of racism, white supremacy. We will be talking more about those strategies, that code that Neely Fuller Jr. advocates and is trying to educate us on. We will be discussing those kinds of behaviors that mitigate and make a whole lot less effective racism, white supremacy on black males, black families, black culture, black agency. We'll be talking about it. We'll be focused on it. Let me continue. On July 24th, 1919, the War Department received a request from the Chief of Police in New Orleans. What help would he receive from troops at the Newton-Jackson barracks should race riots break out? The chief also contacted the Bureau of Investigations. This is the early precursor to the Bureau of Investigation, FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigations. He had been told blacks were contemplating an uprising against the whites. So he was taking all precautions to prevent any casualties in the event the Negro population became hostile. Yeah, well, he wasn't worried about casualties to us. He was talking about casualties to whites. This is every attempt to protect the white population. Obviously, they thought we were a force to be reckoned with at that time. They don't worry about that now. I assure you. They do not worry about us now because they know that collectively we don't have that many guns. They know. That's exactly why everyone is watched and monitored in this new society. These precautions included authorization of the city's home guard to patrol with police if needed. Home guard. The city's now got a home guard. What the hell is that? To patrol with the police. That reminds me of that shooting in Florida. What was that young kid that got shot by the night watchman? I can't remember. How is it that the white population always is at the ready to work with the police and the federal government when it comes to attacking black people? How is that even possible? A scheduled address by Milton J. Marshall, an agent of Marcus Garvey's Black Star Line, was the cause for alarm. A poster promised Marshall would speak about blacks' wartime contributions and the need to make the United States safe for blacks. What's wrong with that? I'll tell you in a minute what's wrong with it in the mind of the white supremacists. A Bureau of Investigation agent declaring the advertisement inflammatory in the extreme persuaded the mayor and police to halt the meeting and force Marshall to leave town. Look at this. We can't even come together to organize for our own protection. I'm telling you, folks, you better wake up to racism, white supremacy. systemic and worldwide, wake up to how they protect themselves. If they can, if they know anything about our next move, trust me, they are on top of it, hijacking the movement before you even get there. It says just days later, the MID filed a report about a secret black society called the Boule. Formed in Dahomey, West Africa, the Boule allegedly required members to swear to die defending their brothers and to exterminate white rulers, and had helped start Washington's riot. Brothers and sisters, if any of you understand the Boule, whatever it may have started out to be based on this article, it didn't end up being that way. As a matter of fact, the Boule wound up being a black fraternity that constituted what was called the Talented Tenth. The same Talented Tenth and that fraternity worked exclusively for the king. Boule means messenger to the king. So whatever it started out being based on this article, they wound up working for white supremacy and cooperating quite nicely with it. And they did well for themselves. They were the black front for white supremacy. Look it up. But what does this say here about the Boule? Let's look at it. The Boule allegedly required members to swear to die defending their brothers and to exterminate white rulers, and had helped start Washington's riot, so they say. A printed slip, which has fallen into the hands of investigators, revealed the MID believed a Boule plot to transport and stockpile weapons across the country, one city at a time, send ammunition by the following way: by parcel post, by express, by porters on Pullman, quote unquote. Light-skinned blacks, passing as whites, were supposedly buying the ammunition with the explanation that they needed it to protect themselves from blacks. The MID offered no corroborating evidence for the plot, however, or even for the Boule's existence. See, much of this at that time was speculation. Let's keep going. On August 6th, Bureau of Investigation Chief Frank Burke summarized a pessimistic prognostication from a Bureau of Investigation special employee named McCaleb, who lived in Texas. Quote, "It would appear that no way seems practicable to prevent race riots, as they are apt to break out on the slightest provocation at any point in Texas." McCaleb had attended a meeting convened by the governor to discuss Longview's riot and the possible influence of communism, and he equated the new Negro movement with specific forms of radicalism, even if the evidence was lacking. Quote, "Nothing tangible was brought out in the conference regarding the Bolsheviki propaganda. But from the general and specific information obtained by the state authorities, it is certain that the Negroes are being urged to defend their rights." They don't have to be urged. They just have to be afraid enough to do it and smart enough to be on point. According to McCaleb, whites believed that black veterans were responsible for raising tensions. I don't know. Another Bureau of Investigation agent was blunter, or more blunt. He says, quote, "One of the principal elements causing concern in Texas is the returned Negro soldier, who is not readily fitting back into his prior status of pre-war time." You catch that? That's what I was saying. They lose their mind when things don't fall back in place, where they are in charge. They lose all sense of reality. It's the same way today. It's just more subtle. Listen, in other words, black veterans were insisting on their equality with whites. Why would we have to insist on that if we just got finished fighting for your monkey ass? This is incredible, folks. You telling me we're not going through the same kinds of inequality in America? Unless you're asleep or under a rock somewhere, it's the same kind of crap. This is why I got to talk about this. We need a strategy in terms of how we are going to respond. Marching through the streets, screaming and begging and petitioning the government in the way we have been doing is not effective. It's not working. I'm sorry, it's not working. We need to try an entirely different strategy. But first, you got to understand what you're facing. And this is the reason we want to explore what Frances Cress Welsing has already tried to teach us, and Neely Fuller, who is her colleague. They fully have codified this entire system, and if we would simply pay attention to what they've been saying for the last 30 years, we can beat this thing, annihilate it, eliminate it, and replace it, as they say, with justice. It can be done. Maybe not in my lifetime, maybe not in the next 25 years, but if we get on code starting now, your children might be in a better position than you. Let's keep going. Rumors from Texas continued to preoccupy federal intelligence officials. In Waco, word spread that black residents were signing a declaration that the Great War had made equals of blacks and whites. Bureau of Investigation agent R.W. Tinsley went straight to an absolutely reliable source, quote unquote, Mrs. Sarah Morris, a black janitor in Waco's federal building. That's his reliable source, right? Let me find it. Hold on. My page jumps around a little bit. Okay, hold on. Let's talk about his source. God, I hate this. Okay. Mrs. Sarah Morris, a black janitor in Waco's federal building. She assured Tinsley that the rumor was unfounded. As a precaution, Tinsley consulted with the city's postmaster, who began monitoring the mail of a local black pharmacist, Dr. J.W. Fridia. Like Longview's S.L. Jones, Fridia was a local sales agent for the Defender, which, in Tinsley's view, contained some rather radical articles. Talking about the Defender here. Also like Jones, Fridia was harassed by white men who demanded that he stop selling the paper. The pharmacist immediately asked for police protection. Rather than question the men who had menaced Fridia, the chief of police warned him in no uncertain terms that if there was any trouble with the Negroes, that the agitators would be summarily dealt with. He ain't talking about blacks. He ain't talking about protecting us at all. We're the agitators looking for protection. Fridia got the message. He promised to stop selling the Defender. Look at this man. By late 1919, the Bureau of Investigation was chasing the foggiest of rumors. Yet, the fact that no uprisings occurred did not abate its concern and that of other national security agencies. The MID, in its last weekly intelligence digest for August, declared that although there had been no outbreaks of racial violence, the national atmosphere was like that of an armed truce, and that agitators continued to stir black resentment by talking and writing about racial injustice. So we're agitators because we're talking about our situation. So you see, this is why this whole conversation about Tulsa, Oklahoma in the media and by Joe Biden and his administration is an attempt to get out in front of the narrative and control it. Like I said in my other video about this, we need to be discussing what happened for the purposes of strategizing today. We need to understand our past for the purposes of strategizing and smartly conducting ourselves today, in the present. I am not interested in the white media, the white power structure, or anything white and in power delegating, informing, or even teaching me about my history. That's backwards. We're coming to the closing portions of this brief paper from 1919. And hopefully my commentary hasn't ruined my reading of this account. But I thought it important and apropos, since this conversation today is all about us and our problems in the past. I just want to get out in front of it just like they do and get control of the narrative. Get it out of the hands of the mainstream media. They will never tell our story in terms of informing, educating, and empowering our community. Never. Finally, it is my only protection. Quote, armed truce was an apt phrase. The belief that African Americans were stockpiling arms and ammunition was a major source for white fears of black uprisings. The belief originated in the military. In April 1919, Colonel John Dunn, citing unnamed but supposedly reliable sources, warned MID Director Marlborough Churchill that almost every serviceman in the colored labor battalions returning from France has secreted somewhere about their person or in their baggage an army revolver obtained before they left the other side. Dunn urged Churchill to launch an immediate investigation. The importance of this matter can hardly be overestimated, since it is a well-known fact that there is a great deal of social and labor unrest among the Negro population of the United States, who are demanding social equality as well as other changes from their pre-war status. If you'll notice from this article, you can almost sense that the biggest problem we had in our communities at that time was not with each other, but with the white population and the white power structure. Had we been left alone to simply prosper as a community, you would not have heard a gunshot, you would not have had a stabbing, you would not have had us killing each other the way we do today. And that's why I want to distinguish the problems we had then compared to the problems we're having now. In other words, we're having a double issue now. Not only are we being harassed indirectly by the system of racism, white supremacy, and made confused and turned backwards in on ourselves, it is working marvelously well because we are now more than ever in parts of our community killing each other. We don't even see that the real enemy is in fact the same one that we faced in 1919. That's the point that I'm trying to make right here. Negro publications now openly advocate race war and violence. And if there be any truth in this report about the revolvers, this would seem to indicate one of the sources from which they are obtaining or could obtain firearms for illegal purposes. Churchill agreed, but he ordered that servicemen of both races be searched upon their return. The results proved Dunn's sources to be far less reliable. In other words, there's not a whole lot of truth in this. Black people weren't bringing back guns. They probably should have, but I don't think they were, because maybe they were. Maybe some did. Maybe some did. Probably would have been a smart thing to do. But anyway, this guy Dunn, his sources were far from reliable. So during May, 9,000 men arriving at Newport News were searched. Just 31 pistols were discovered, so some had brought back some. It says, having failed to find guns, the MID looked for communist propaganda. Here we go again. Aboard the troops' transports. One after another, investigating officers reported no evidence of radical literature or proselytizing. Surprise, surprise. Instead, they observed black soldiers discussing the need to fight for equality. Here we go. This is what we do. Okay? We try and figure this out. We try to strategize. And we fight for what we shouldn't have to fight for. An officer aboard the USS Orizaba reported hearing two black soldiers agreeing that the Negro would have to stand for his rights as a citizen or be deprived of them. So true. The officer remarked sourly, "This seems to throw some light as to what we may expect of the Negro in the near future." Another officer overheard a black enlisted man say, he says, "Things come on, would be different in the States now." So this black guy is reminiscing that things are going to be different when they get back. The personnel adjutant of one transport reported that black soldiers from the South were receiving letters from their families warning them not to wear their uniforms when they returned home because of attacks on black veterans. Look at this. I heard about this. I remember hearing about that. Concern over the assertiveness of black soldiers, in other words, standing up and being a man, reached the highest levels in mid-July. Secretary of War Newton Baker ordered that the mixing of white and colored troops on transports should be avoided as much as possible. Look at that. Why would they not want whites and blacks to mix? Whites and blacks fought and died and probably protected one another. They come back here and now they are encouraged not to mix. White genetic survival. Do you see how Francis and Neely Fuller put this together? It makes sense. If the black and white population were not at odds right now, for the most part, think about it. Our common enemy would be what? The structure. The government power structure. Think about it. So what does the structure, the system, and those who empower and run it use as their strategy and secret weapon? Divide and conquer. There it is. Keep people divided and use the artificial construct of colorism to do it. Come on, people. Connect the dots. This goes way back, even beyond 1919. The fact that so many black veterans used legally purchased arms for self-defense during the Washington and Chicago riots stoked the smoldering fears of uprisings. There it is. A report forwarded to the BI in late August claimed that the troubles in those cities augured uprisings against whites in other cities. According to the unnamed author, who cited a so-called reliable source, African Americans were using express rail, parcel posts, and even coffins to ship arms and ammunition. Blacks who could pass as whites were purchasing the weapons to avoid attracting attention. Quoting a secretive message allegedly circulating in New York, the author surmised that Philadelphia and Cleveland were the next targets. The 26-page report was strident, alarmist, and lacked corroboration, of course. Surprise, surprise. But it was also typical of the intelligence received by the BI and MID that summer. BI agent William Sausallee, who investigated a prediction that blacks would ambush whites during a St. Louis parade, determined that most of these rumors, when traced, ended in some such blind alley as heard it on a streetcar or talking to two men in a saloon. In other words, that too fell flat because it had no evidence of being real. Yet, BI agents and MID officers dutifully passed on the received information to their superiors. Come on, y'all. Who did the same? Copies swiftly arrived at the offices of other government intelligence offices. The chain of command thus became de facto verification of the reports. False reports. Why are they circulating this garbage? Consider the following cover letter, signed by MID Director Marlborough Churchill and addressed to BI Chief Frank Burke. Enclosed herewith, for your information, find copy of third endorsement dated St. Louis, August 4th, 1919. Look at this. And addressed to Headquarters, Central Department, Chicago, Illinois, and signed T.S. Moffett, Captain, USA Intelligence Officer. I mean, really, really official, right? Same being a report of an investigation made by the intelligence officer, St. Louis, of certain rumors that Negroes were purchasing firearms in St. Louis and East St. Louis, Missouri. Churchill offered not a word about the rumors' veracity. Note the non-committal phrase, for your information, quote unquote. But the lengthy provenance of what was essentially a report about rumors suggested the information was of the utmost significance. Same thing happening today. They make everything massively bigger than it really is. Get the hell out of here. Like the rumors about racial uprisings, stories of rampant arms purchases and stockpiling proved exaggerated, inaccurate, or uncorroborated. For his report, Captain Moffett had interviewed St. Louis's chief of police and chief of detectives. Both men stated, quote, their reports show that a large number of high-powered rifles and pistols and a large amount of ammunition have been purchased, unquote, by blacks in St. Louis and East St. Louis. When asked, however, neither man could estimate that large number, quote unquote. Concerned that black employees were stealing gun parts to assemble weapons, led the Remington Arms Company of Connecticut to place watchers on the factory floor. I mean, this paranoia is all over the country. They scared to death of black people, man. Organizing and defending themselves. And it's the same fear to this day. In Denver, an intrepid Bureau of Investigation agent, hearing rumors of increased arms sales, visited pawnbrokers and gun shops in October. One pawn shop had sold a single handgun to an African American during the previous 6 weeks. Another broker had sold 25 pistols to blacks in July and 11 in August. The reason for the modest increase in sales was no mystery to the agent. Quote, the Chicago trouble. In Newport News, fears of a black uprising led the city council to require permits from a city official to purchase firearms, and the police prohibited the sale of weapons to African Americans. But there was an uptick in arms sales to whites. Newport News was not the only community that restricted or prohibited arms purchased by African Americans. City authorities and local gun shops stopped weapons sales to blacks in Washington and Chicago during those cities' riots. Throughout Texas, gun dealers worked, look at this, with local, state, and federal officials to prohibit gun sales to blacks after those riots as well. On August 5th, a Beaumont hardware store manager reported to the BI that 5 black men had tried to purchase rifles that day, but he had refused them. The manager was not alone. All of the hardware stores in Port Arthur and 2 other large hardware stores in Beaumont had agreed not to sell rifles to blacks. An embargo that continued until at least October. Indeed, all dealers in the larger cities have been instructed by the Sheriff's Department not to sell any more ammunition or firearms to the Negroes, reported a special agent with the U.S. Railroad Administration. An El Paso, Texas gun dealer informed the MID that Pullman porters were trying to buy weapons and ammunition. He feared the porters were smuggling the guns to Chicago. The sheriff of Harrison County, Texas, recorded all shipment of weapons and ammunition to black residents. He also stopped blacks from selling the Defender, the paper. African Americans who sent or sought weapons through the mail also risked the intervention of federal authorities. C.K. Jackson, a hotel porter in Washington, D.C., asked his brother to send him a revolver and cartridge from Scranton, Pennsylvania, during the Capitol's riot. After a postal inspector intercepted the package, the BI sent an agent to interview C.K. Jackson and his employer. The agent decided the subject, quote unquote, was a, quote, quiet, good man, very peaceful, and would not, quote, use the revolver even if he had one. The BI closed the investigation without further action. Also in Washington, a prominent black physician, fearing that more anti-black collective violence might break out, asked an attorney in New York to mail him 6 revolvers and ammunition. The request came to the attention of Major Loving, who implored the lawyer not to send the weapons. Loving's request, as well as BI's agent's belief that it was his duty to assess C.K. Jackson's right to own a firearm. Look at this, man. His duty. His duty as a white man. So it says, Loving's request, as well as the BI agent's belief that it was his duty to assess C.K. Jackson's right to own a firearm, illustrate the extent of the government's campaign to impede black gun ownership. Every step of the way, every time you see violence against our community, it is with the government's help. Why would you think this government is going to help us in any way today? We must do this ourselves. Please wake up. I'm coming to the end of this. Sorry if it took long. That's it. It's all I have to protect myself. The article, 1919, the year of racial violence. Well, this video has gone on long enough. I think that most of you get the idea and you get the point. This is not over. We'll be back with another book, article, whatever might be interesting and informative and strategic for our community. Next time on this channel, I'm Mr. Mark 60. Be at peace. Stay woke. I like that statement. And let's talk to one another. Take care. Until next time.